And I just want to share with my viewers that it was somewhere in New York itself that you went to a temple and then seeing the forms of the deities, you felt something special, which has kind of changed the course of your life in a very significant way. I would request you to go back with us to that particular temple and whatever happened in your mind being there.
All right. Well, it certainly was some time ago. Presently, I'm 43 years old, so we're talking about approximately 3 decades ago. I was about 14 years old at the time when I visited my first Hindu temple, and that was in Queens, New York, actually very close to here. It was the Ganapati Temple on Bound Street. And previous to that, I had been studying Hinduism. Even as a child, I had read the Bhagavad Gita. But this was my very first time actually visiting a temple. And I remember as a child, it was an interesting experience. Living in Brooklyn, I remember it was a very long distance to get there. I had to take the train from Brooklyn into Manhattan, into Queens. And then when I got off, to my dismay, I realized I then had to walk about half a mile. But what was interesting is, as I was doing this walking, I would pass house after house, and everything seemed fine. Everything just seemed familiar to me, you know, normal house after normal house. And then suddenly, there on my left was India. There was this beautiful, magnificently carved temple. And I was astounded just at how beautiful it was. But then I walked into the temple. And when I walked into the temple, I had this truly significant experience. First, just even walking into the door, I quite literally felt as if I was leaving behind the world I had known and I was now entering into a spiritual realm. And this, again, being my very first time at a temple, my senses were assaulted, but nicely, wonderfully assaulted. I was smelling the incense, you know. I was hearing the priests as they were reciting these beautiful Sanskrit mantras. As I looked all around me, I was seeing these beautiful images of the devas and the devis. So literally my senses were overwhelmed. And after drinking it in for some time, I finally had this fascinating experience. It was a powerful experience. I felt as if I was home. And you know, it's interesting. For many Westerners, when they enter a Hindu temple for the first time, they can feel very overwhelmed because the culture is very, very different. For me, it was a very pleasant form of being overwhelmed. I literally felt as if I was home. And that very day, I remember I went to a smaller place where they had Venkateshwara off to the side. And I remember sitting there and just meditating for some time. And in my mind, surrendering myself and saying to myself, this is now my religion. And it will be for the rest of my life. And I was 14 at the time. And again, I'm 43, still practicing Sanatana Dharma to this day.
Right, it's really an interesting and kind of a mystical feeling to hear this kind of experience one undergoes. Like we hear in Mahatma Gandhi's case when somebody tried to push him out of the train, they wanted to get up.
Right.
So there comes few moments which becomes defining moments. So what after that? Once you came out, you decided to pursue studying Hinduism?
Yes. As I said, I was actually studying it for a few years even beforehand. But after that, my commitment just became even stronger. This is the thing that's interesting about Hinduism and about spirituality in general. It's one thing to understand it from a theoretical perspective, but really, ultimately, for spirituality to be alive, we have to experience it. And it was especially at that point, going to the temple, that now my reading of the Bhagavad Gita became even more alive. So yes, I began pursuing it even more, studying yoga, studying meditation, continuing to read the scriptures, doing puja at home, and again, now consciously identifying myself as a Hindu. So soon after that, I became a monk, a Hindu monk living here in New York, but then also going to India several times, living there as well. And yes, I began practicing it in a very in-depth way, taking vows. I've been, for example, vegetarian since 12. You know, I follow all these vows very strictly. I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke, etc. And what I decided to do later in life was to then couple my personal experience and study with then more of an academic study. of Hinduism. So I ended up going on to college. I went to Loyola University in Chicago, which was, interestingly, a Catholic university. I studied there with Jesuit priests. I studied Western philosophy, Western theology. I then went on to graduate school, where I focused on languages and cultures of Asia, but again, focusing on Hinduism, Sanskrit, etc. I earned a master's and then a PhD in languages and cultures of Asia. And the whole point of my doing this was, again, to kind of couple my own personal commitment to Sanatana Dharma with then an academic knowledge in such a way that I could then teach people in a somewhat higher, more sophisticated way. So I graduated with my PhD in 2002 from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and what I've been doing since then has been essentially just traveling the country, traveling everywhere, and teaching people Sanatana Dharma. This is what I do full-time. I'm a full-time spiritual teacher, hence my name, Sri Dharma Pravartaka Acharya. And this is my life. My life is quite literally dedicated to, in whatever humble way I can, teaching people Sanatana Dharma, both Indian Hindu audiences as well as Western audiences.
How do you prefer to be addressed, as Dr. Frank or Dharma Pravartaka?
Well, I always prefer Sanskrit. I always prefer. My students call me Acharyaji, but anything in Sanskrit would be fine.
So I would now change from Dr. Frank to Acharyaji. I didn't know about your commitment towards spreading the knowledge of Indian culture, call it, or Hinduism.
Sanatana Dharma.
Sanatana Dharma.
Yes.
Sanatana Dharma. Now, I want to come back to you before you started your academic life. When you were practicing, you said, and you became monk.
Yes.
Were you also initiated by any particular guru, any spiritual saint?
Yes, I was, actually. I received several initiations. The first initiation, I would have to say, really happened when I was about 14. It was very interesting. There was a priest who was there at the temple, and after I had gone back to the temple several times, he finally approached me. I mean, I'm sure it was a very odd experience for him, seeing this 14-year-old, white boy there at the temple all the time. I was coming several times a week at this point. So he finally approached me, and he gave me somewhat informal initiation into the mantra Om Namo Narayanaya. Again, it was somewhat informal. And unfortunately, to this day, I don't even remember his name because he was only there for a few months and then he disappeared. But I received formal Diksha initiation in India in 1985. My guru's name is Bhakti Rakshaka Sridhar Swami. And he passed away in 1988, unfortunately. He was quite elderly at the time. But that was 85. Then I went back in 1986, a year later, and I received Brahmana initiation. So I wear a Upavita Sutra, I wear a Brahman thread and everything. So again, that was 86. And those were the primary initiations that I had. And currently I'm a Sri Vaishnava. I'm a follower of Ramanuja.
Very nice. And going back to, because what happens is the society that you live in, and if you start following certain practices which are unfamiliar for people around you, talking about your parents and your friends and your relatives, and they would see what has happened to him. Was it difficult for you to kind of stand by your conviction? Because I can imagine the kind of, some people ridicule it, and
Sure.
they would question your source of faith that is making a kind of visible transformation.
Sure. Well, initially especially, certainly it was a little bit difficult because it was a very significant transition in my life. It was a complete transformation of everything, my entire lifestyle, my beliefs, everything. I was very fortunate in that my parents were very open-minded people. They themselves were